This is my CAA number 3. I am Courtney Hoffman, and my first case is the Brown versus Board of Education, which was in 1954. This case was a monumental step in history, and it voted segregation to be unconstitutional. This all came to be when Oliver Brown challenged the Board of Education in Kansas because his daughter was denied the right to attend an all-white school. The verdict went towards Brown, honestly probably because Fred Vinson died earlier that year and had been replaced with Earl Warren. This famous case stated that separate but equal stance was proven to not be equal at all. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. This act was to provide opportunities and resources for the less fortunate students. Some examples that may include resources are grants, special education centers, and scholarships. When Lyndon B. Johnson signed this act, he validated the government's dedication to educating the younger generations. While changes have been made over the years to better implement the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the act itself has stood to better education for students for almost 55 years. Bilingual Education Act of 1968 was created to develop bilingual education programs for those students with limited English abilities. The assistance would be possible through grants in which they could offer staff training, program research, and other educational resources. This was the very first centralized legislation that addressed the needs of students that struggled with English. This set the stage for further educational needs for those minorities facing similar problems. The Ethnic Heritage Studies Act was implemented in 1972. This act provides grants that will ensure multicultural projects are being issued in school as a part of the curriculum. It establishes that a series of ethnic heritage study projects will cover the history, geography, economy, literature, music, art, and other cultural aspects of various groups across the world. The Lau versus Nichols case was in 1974. This came about because California classrooms were integrated, and with this, it brought thousands and thousands of Chinese children into the white schools. Even though there were so many Chinese children, they didn't implement any English learning programs. Therefore, all the content was taught in only English, and this led to Lau and other Chinese children bringing the issue to court because they stated that they were receiving unequal educational opportunities. Surprisingly, the favor went towards the school because it was seen that they didn't violate any prior laws. Although, when the case went to the Supreme Court later, they saw it differently, and then from then on, public schools were required to provide English language learners with adequate programs. Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974. When this law passed, it prohibited discrimination against faculty, staff, and students. It requires school districts to take action in helping English language learning students to overcome the obstacles they face and making sure they are treated equally. It ensures that all students, despite their native language, will receive a quality education. If necessary, changes will be made in the instruction, staff, materials, and assessments to ensure that those students are getting the proper education that they deserve. The Law Remedies of 1975. These policy guidelines for English language learners are based off of the Lau versus Nichols case. They state that if a school has 20 or more students speaking a minority language, that they need to find a way to identify these students. It also states that they need to evaluate the English proficiency of these students to see where they stand on the scale. And then lastly, it provides them with appropriate bilingual programs that will cater to their needs and help them get the best education possible. Regents of University of California versus Back. This case came about because Alan Back was a white man who had applied to the University of California's medical program not once, but twice, and he was rejected both times, despite being very educated and scoring wonderfully on his test scores and GPA. His rejection came about because they were holding 16 spots per every 100 for minorities that were deemed qualified, even though his scores were much more qualified than those minorities. Back argued that he was being denied simply because of race, and therefore this court verdict ended up leaning towards Back and saying that he could now be admitted to the University of California's medical program. Castaneda versus Pickard. This case came about because Mexican Americans felt as though they were being discriminated against due to their ethnicity. Their argument was that classroom grouping was evident to be racist, and yet there was no way to evaluate the school's approach. The first time the case was tried, it went in favor of the defendant, although in 1981 it ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. As a result, there are now 3 principles that must be followed. The measures must be based on a sound educational theory, it must be implemented effectively, and it must be proven effective after a set amount of time. Teresa versus Berkeley. In this case, citizens were testifying that the Civil Rights Act was being violated, as well as the Equal Education Opportunity Act. The issue was that there weren't enough teachers to adequately fill the bilingual classrooms. Although it was ruled that the teachers don't have to teach in anything other than English to be effective, and therefore teaching and testing was done in English. Citations are as followed, and especially the use of the book by Crawford. Thank you.